Team Temple Storm, and I'm here with a beginner's guide to Arena. And so this guide is pretty much focused to just like basics of Arena. If you're averaging anywhere between like 0 and 3 or 4 wins, then this should be a good guide for you. And I'm going to give you a lot of basic tips. Some of these tips do not really apply well if you're an average player or maybe even like a advanced player. Then a lot of these tips you probably will disagree with. But if you're just starting out, these are the tips that I'm going to say that you should probably follow until you get better. So the first thing I want to talk about is I'm going to cut this video into 2 parts. So the first part I'll go over how to draft properly in Arena, and in the next video I'll talk about how to like play out your deck and your games. So let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is the vanilla card test. So the vanilla card test is for minions, and each minion for the cost, assuming it has no text on the card, right? So it's not like a Bloodfen Raptor here. The optimal stats for a card with no stats, no text on the card, no special effects, is 2 times the mana cost plus 1. So for 2 drops, 2 times 2 plus 1 is 5. For 3 drops, if you look at something like a Spider Tank, you have a 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and this has 7. So those are optimal stats. And that's kind of what you're looking for in Arena. But what's also important is how many of each one of these mana cost cards you draft in your deck, and also where the stats are allocated. A general tip for you newbies out there is you want to go with the 6-4-6 rule. So remember this. For most classes, you want 6 2-drops, you want 4 3-drops, and 6 4-drops. You don't have to follow it very strictly, but you want to hit around that number. So what that means is, you want a good number of 2s. That way you don't skip your turn 2, because a lot of games are won and lost by turn or on turn 2. And especially if you're a newer player, it's a lot harder to make a comeback if you miss your turn 2 play. And this is why we Arena players, focus so much on making sure our curve just has enough early game in it, and also late game, and just looks right. So we want a lot of 2-drops is pretty much what that means. A little bit less 3-drops, and then also we're back at 4s, a lot of 4-drops. And I can go into a little bit of history or like the reasoning why you want 6 of these and 4 of these and 6 of these. Generally, even cost cards are better quality. The Hearthstone developers actually, in my opinion, I think they did it this way so that the game isn't so linear and one-dimensional, in that you play a card and then your opponent plays an equal card, or if they're player 1, they play a slightly bigger card, and then you play your card, and then you're just stacking a slightly better card after your opponent plays a slightly worse card. It just becomes a little bit boring. So that's why you get those like power humps on your 2-drops and your 4-drops, and those cards are very important. So let's see. So we're looking for a 6-4-6 curve with our 2-3-4 curve, and for like late game cards, and I'll classify that as anything that costs 5 or more mana. You can have anywhere between like 3 and 10. You have a lot of room for flexibility, and depending on what class you're playing, you want more or less, depending on how aggressive and how fast you want the deck to run, or how like control oriented and how much value you want to try to take with your bigger cards. So don't worry too much about the late game for now. You can experiment a little bit and see what fits you and your playstyle. So to make this easy, we're going to talk about stat allocation. So for 2-drops, let's start at 1s actually. So for 1-drops, we look at the vanilla card test, 1 times 2 plus 1 for a vanilla card. But wait, you have a Beast of Sergeant, 1 times 2 plus 1 is 3, and this has 3, but it actually has text on it. So the reason for this is because 1-drops are so low impact overall, and are a somewhat bad top deck in the late game, and just generally just loses you a card. 1-drops will have special effects a lot of them will. You know, you got the South Sea with charge, or you have like Light Warden with the ability to buff up, a Leper Gnome that does a little bit of extra damage. But what you're looking for with 1-drops, and generally you don't go out of your way to pick 1-drops, but if you do have to pick a 1-drop over a really bad card, which could be, you know, like, I don't know, like a Ancient Mage, or, you know, a Dragonling Mechanic maybe, what you're looking for is 2-1s. 2-1s are good because they trade with 2-drops. So this actually brings us to our next point, is 2-drops. You have 2 different kinds mainly that you would pick in Arena. It's your 2-mana 3/2s and your 2-mana 2/3s. And because 1-drops, the 2-1s trade up, it gets you the ability to get a tempo advantage at the start of the game if you can get your 1-drop on turn 1. And also, you don't want to pick a 1-drop just because it's a 2/1, but cards like Abusive Sergeant, or, you know, Clockwork Gnome, Leper Gnome in a really fast deck can be very very good, especially if you don't have enough 2-drops in your deck. You can kind of replace them with the 1-drops that you may get offered in your draft. Worgen Infiltrator is a good one. Zombie Chow. I'll go over like my top picks and like cards that you should keep your eye open for in each mana slot right after I go over stat allocation here. So 2-mana 3/2s and 2-mana 2/3s are the main 2-drops that you'll see, and these are the best because they don't die for free to other 2-drops. And by other 2-drops, I'm talking about the 2-mana 1/3s. 2-mana 1/3s. Let me see if I can find one here. You got the Mana Addict, you got the Master Swordsmith, you know, there are a couple others. And also the 2-mana 2/2s also are very bad, and they die for free to 2-mana 2/3s. So you got your Mana Addicts, you know, your Direwolf Alpha, which is not necessarily a bad card, but it's a little bit harder to use. And as a new player, you shouldn't try to pick things that require a little bit of board or a little bit of synergy. You should be you should rely more on cards that just trade on curve. So instead of picking something like a Cobalt Geomancer, which dies to 2/3, and which could leave you in a bad spot in the early game, you should be picking 3/2s and 2/3s. And so this discussion on what is better between a 2/3 and 3/2 has gone on since pretty much the start of Hearthstone Arena, since Classic. In the past, I would say that 3/2s did have an advantage, but the meta has sped up to a point where a lot of people are playing 1-drops that are 2/1s, and a lot of classes have things like Shield of Mini, and a lot of people are picking, you know, mid-game AoE, Cleaves, Forked Lightnings, Consecrations, and Holy Novas and whatnot. So 2-mana 3/2s have gone down a little bit. What I would prefer personally is to have like 4 2-mana 2/3s and 2 2-mana 3/2s. So a small mix there. You definitely don't want all 2/3s and all 3/2s, because as you'll figure out in your games, 3/2s are better in certain matchups, and 2/3s are also, you know, a little bit better in certain matchups. So, you know, as you gain that experience, you can kind of be like, hey, you know what? In my opening hand, I have this 2/3 and 3/2 against. Let's use the easy example. Against Paladin, which one do I send back? You're going to want to send back the 3/2. That way you don't get destroyed by a Shield of Mini, and you don't have to, you know, if your opponent plays a 2/3, you can play the 2/3 back, and you don't have to be weak to something like an Archer Protector and whatnot. So a nice mix, 2-mana 3/2, 2/3, pretty equal in power, but that's what you're looking for. Try to stay away from things like Crazed Alchemist, Direwolf, you know, Frostwolf Grunt. There are a couple others that are not 2-mana 3/2s and 2/3s that I'll go over later that are very good, but that's the general rule for 2-drops. And 3-drops. 3-drops are actually very special. Not a lot of them have like the vanilla stats. It's not so obvious. It's not just like one, you know, all 1-mana 2/1s are like pretty much the same thing, and all 2-mana 2/3s and 3/2s are the same thing. A lot of 3-drops have special effects, and some of them are worth the effect for the stat discount. So if we go with the vanilla test here, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, but this card has 6 stats. Is it good or bad? It actually has less stats, and if we're looking for stats in Arena, it should be bad, right? But there are a couple of cards that the card effect actually does pay off. And the one reason why we do try to avoid these like card effects and not take cards like Blackwing Technician or Murloc War Leader, for example, is because it's very hard to get these kind of synergies in Arena, and you never really draft in a way where you from the start try to make a synergistic deck. That's the kind of thing. It's a kind of thing you like learn to do, or you kind of like see it in your draft, and like towards the end of your draft you can kind of add like a Murloc War Leader if you have a lot of Murloc synergy or whatever. But generally you should still try to follow the 3-mana 3/4 test. So you have your Spider Tank, and there are a couple other like equally good. So like Harvest Golem, you can count like the Death Rattle as +2/+1, and then it's like a 3-mana 4/4. Pretty crazy, right? Or something like where'd you go? Ogre Brute, 3-mana 4/4. You get an extra point, and the downside is not such a big deal. I think 3-drops are very tricky though. It's very hard to tell which ones are good, but as a general rule, I'll tell you that 3-mana 3/3s are kind of weak because they trade down so easily. Because if you go back, and we're going to do this a lot, we're going to keep going back and forth, 2-mana 3/2s trade 1-for-1 with 3-mana 3/3. So that's a mana advantage your opponent can gain, or you can gain if you manage to trade up that way. So you want to try to avoid that, just like how we want to pick 2-1s because they trade up with 3/2s. You see how this works? It's all connected to like what other people most likely pick as their other other mana cost cards. Archer Horse Rider, pretty much a 3-mana 4/1. You're providing 4 damage to the board, and has the benefit of being a charge. Once again, I'm just gonna go over like quickly, and I'll give you my top picks for each mana slot after this. 4-drops. 4-drops are very, very, very important. So I like to see 4-drops in 2 different ways. There are the 4-drops that have 5 health, and the ones that have 4 or less health. And my favorite are the ones that have 5 health. 4-mana 4/5s are almost tippy top tier. Pilot Shredder is the best 4-drop in the game, but if we ignore that card, since that card is pretty much cheating, 4-mana 4/5 is the best you're going to get. It's your Yeti, and that's what you want to go for. The reason for this is it deals with 3-drops really well, and we'll go back to Spider Tank. You imagine your opponent plays a Spider Tank and you can slam a Yeti down. It puts your opponent in a bad spot. They need to have an answer because the Yeti deals with it so easily, right? After 4/5s, my second choice personally is to pick 3/5s. I think they're very important, especially the slower class. If you're playing a slower class like Druid, Priest, or Mage, control class, you need to stabilize at some point. If you have a slow deck, you play a 4-mana 3/5. If your opponent has a bunch of 2-drops or 3-drops on board, 3/5s are much more likely to stabilize you than something like a 4-mana 5/4. Even though a 4-mana 5/4 has 9 stats and the 4-mana 3/5 has 8 stats, because the health is a little bit higher, and because we assume 3 damage can kill most things played in the early game, they pretty much do the same thing, but this survives a little bit more. Plays around a couple more removals, plays around a couple more buffs, and it's just a little bit sturdier. That does not mean that 4-mana 5/4s are bad, but as a new player, I'm not going to go very deep into this. Just 4-mana 4/5s, your bread and butter. 4-mana 3/5s, your second choice. After that, you can pick up 5/4s, and then after that, you can pick up things like Oasis Snapjaw that are 2/7s and 2/6s. I think that's fine too. And we move on to like late game cards, 5+. I will give you a small tip here. 5-drops are very easy to predict whenever your opponent's going to play a 5-drop. A lot of them have 6 health. You got your Fen Creeper, you got your Spiteful Smith, Spectral Knight. I know it's a little bit confusing because there are a lot of 5-drops you see here and you're like, hey, this doesn't have 5 health, this doesn't have 5 health. But these are cards that you will see, and these are cards that people actually pick in Arena. So, we're not going to talk about things like Rubashi or Hemet or, Lotheb. But generally you'll be up against a 5 mana 4/6, and after that, the second most likely stat is 5 mana 5/5. And this is more of a nuanced pick. I wouldn't worry too much about, do I need 4/6s in my deck or 5/5s? If you really want to like dig that deep, think about, whether a 4 mana 4/5 is better in your deck or a 4 mana 5/4. Do you need to stabilize on 5 again? Maybe you need that extra health point. Or do you just need to trade off that turn? Maybe you need the higher attack with a 5/5 that could trade turns. It can just move on to the next turn. But don't worry too much about the stats. Just make sure it has like 10 stats. And once again, you're probably wondering why this doesn't really pass the vanilla test, right? 5 mana 4/6s, that's only 10 stats when 5 times 2 plus 1 is 11. But once again, you got your power cards on the even mana cost cards. You got your special cards like Pit Fighter, which do pass the vanilla test, and they're picked card like Pit Fighter is picked really highly because of it. But there are not a lot that do excel in this way. And stat allocation for like super late game cards, you never want to overdo it with really high damage. So let me see. Corehound. Corehound is famous. Corehound is famous because it's really bad. The reason for this is it has a really high attack value, and you're thinking, why not? It's it's the same thing as Capture Jormonger, but the stats are flipped over. But stat allocation is everything. Corehound doesn't stabilize you on 7, and generally, if you're trying to push out damage to finish out a game, you don't need the 9. All you need is something like 5. 5/9 will almost always be better because it plays around more AoE. It's less vulnerable to dying. Corehound is a little bit squishier, and although it can potentially do more damage, it's also turns out that it's very easy to kill, and so very likely it won't be able to push out damage. And in games that you're losing in terms of tempo, when you're behind on the board, it'll probably just die to like a 2-drop plus a buff or something, something horrific like that. So stat allocation is everything. I like to look at cards like, oops, let's see. Gotta just go back here. I like to look at cards like Archmage and Boulder Fist and think about like how many different scenarios where a Archmage isn't as good as a Boulder Fist. And it turns out that a lot of the time Boulder Fist does make a big difference with a 2 extra attack, but also a good amount of the time Archmage also does the same thing because most of the things do die to 4 damage or are weak enough that Archmage is a threat. So keep that in mind. The health values are very important on your late game cards because that's what actually gets you a card advantage in the late game. So I think that's pretty much it talking about like stat allocation. You just don't want to overdo it on damage on your super late game cards and just want to have a good health amount. That's why Ravenholt is bad. Like 6/8s are great, but Chromagus. But I'll give you guys my top picks for each slot, and this will just be simple. And I probably won't be talking about rare cards or epic cards, legendary cards, but I'll just give you like the neutral cards or like the common cards that you will see and give you my top picks. So for 1-drops, Abusive Sergeant is great. What else do we have here? Zombie Chow. And Zombie Chow. Abusive Sergeant, Zombie Chow, and one more is, oh my god, what is his name? The Stealth Dude, Worgen Infiltrator. Those are generally like the 3 1-drops that you will end up picking in Arena. Unless your class has like a really good 1-drop like Hunter with Web Spinner, generally you won't have any other 1-drops that you'll want. Don't even look at the other 1-drops. Don't even look at the other 1-drops. Easy. What else we got here? 2-drops. My top picks. Don't think too much about the Ooze. I think it's okay, but Ooze is very good. Amani. Ooze, Amani, Flame Juggler, top tier. Giblin Stalker, very good. Haunted Creeper does not fit the vanilla test. It actually has more stats, but this makes it an excellent, excellent, excellent card. One of the best 2-drops in the game, and my personal favorite 2-drop. Did I say Fairy Dragon? Fairy Dragon and Gibbon Stalker, you know, just basic 2-mana 3/2s and 2/3s, and 2-drops are very easy, just because, you know, they all of them are 2/3s and 3/2s, the ones that you want anyways. Huge Toad is very good, and you see this pattern continues where we just have 2-drops with 3/2 or 2/3 stats that have a special effect, making them even better. Unlike things like Mad Scientist, you may think, hey, like I watch a lot of Constructed, I see Mad Scientist in every deck, but that's a little bit too synergistic for Arena, and Secrets tend to do a little bit poorly in Arena, so you don't really want to take this stat discount because it puts you at a disadvantage if your opponent has a 2/3, and you never really want to start off a game behind a 2-drop. So Mad Bomber is top tier, Mech Warper, and you know, I said I wouldn't talk about epics, but you know, here we go. You know, Recombobulator is really good. Trog is up there, and yeah, just you see the pattern. Wall Pyromancer, of course. Just 2/3s, 3/2s with special effects are fantastic. 3-drops here. Just go over some good ones here real quickly, and these are the ones that you would even like think about picking. Argent Horse Rider, BGH. Blood Knight, Earthen Ring. Earthen Ring, although it's a 3-mana 3/3 and it's having that stat discount, the heal that you can use not on your face but onto a minion to get you a board advantage is kind of like playing a 3-mana 3/6 sometimes, which can be extremely powerful, and also it can be very clutch healing your own face. Emperor Cobra can be okay. Let's see, what else we got here? Imp Master. Imp Master is a tricky one because it doesn't really look like any of the other 3-drops, but it is very good. You can rely on Imp Master. Harvest Golem. And I'm not a big fan of 3-mana 4/3s. The same problem with 3-mana 4/3s is that they trade down with 3-mana 3/3s, so I'm not a big fan of it. But I am somewhat of a fan of Jungle Panther because you can choose what its attack, and you can just keep it hidden from your opponent's 2-drop, so it does not, in fact, trade down. So keep that in mind. Stealth is valuable in that way. Ogre Brute is very good. Don't fall for the trick. Murloc War Leader sucks. Raging Worgen kind of sucks. Mind Control Tech makes you a terrible person. Scarlet Crusader, one of the best 3-drops in the game. I may be naming a little bit too much. Shattered Sun, you get the +1/+1 on a minion, and then it makes it a 4/3 in a way, but you get the instant effect on the board. It makes it a great 3-drop. Spider Tank, sure. And that's pretty much it. And top picks for 4-drops. This one's pretty easy. You got your Yetis. Yetis are up there, and here's the #1 tip I could probably give you. And this is the thing that'll raise your win rate way up. Here we go. Pilot Shredder. You see this card, you pick this card. Even over a lot of like class cards, like Fireballs, and you know, like a lot of premiums. You know, it has to be like a super premium. For example. If Pilot Shredder was up against a Fireball, I would pick the Pilot Shredder. If it was up against a Flame Strike, I would be really sad and then pick the Flame Strike. That's how I feel about this card. It's just so game-winning and so hard to remove. So Pilot Shredder is up there. And Dark Iron Dwarf is great. Dark Iron Dwarf is really good for helping you trade. It's like a 4-mana 6/4. 4-mana 4/6. You get that extra stat point if you can use it. So Yeti, Dark Iron Dwarf, Pilot Shredder. And there was one more I wanted to talk about here. Oh, here it is. Senjin. Senjin and Heckler. So Senjin, 4-mana 3/5. You get this. It's a little bit smaller than a Yeti, but it does. Taunt does do something in Arena. Taunt does do something in Hearthstone. It allows you to create board situations where your opponent has to make bad trades or you can protect something. It does make a big deal, and this is why Evil Heckler even does okay. Evil Heckler, I would say, is a little bit worse depending on what class you're playing. But yes, they are both very good. Evil Heckler and Senjin. Okay. 5-drops. One of the worst things you could do in Arena is pick too many 5-drops. The 5 slot tends to be really clunky and hard to use, especially in the super late game. You would think that, you know, you have 10 mana in the super late game and you could play 2 5s, that'd be excellent, right? But you're playing once again, the power slots are the even slots, right? You're playing 2 underpowered cards with no flexibility. That means you can only play 2 cards a turn, as opposed to playing a slightly smaller 4-drop with, you know, like double 4-drop plus ping, or plus your hero power if it's a ping, or whatever you want to do with your hero power, or double 4-drop and 2 mana. A lot of good spells, great spells, cost 2 mana, so you can like combo it out and you can do multiple. Like, you're more flexible with your turns, which is a very important thing. But with 5-drops, so because we don't want so many, and there are actually a lot of 5-drops that you get offered, you gotta be kind of picky with your 5s. I would tell you to make sure you don't go over 3 5-drops, and look at your class. So if you're playing Rogue, you get offered the Shadow Pans. So let's look at that quick. Shadow Pan Rider, which is an excellent card, and same with the Dark Iron Skulker, Ogre Ninja. So in classes like Rogue, if you get offered, you know, if you get offered something like Fen Creeper, which is okay, you probably don't want to take it. You might want to take a slightly worse 3-drop or 2-drop or 4-drop, whatever it may be, because you know that your chance for drafting a lot of 5s is high as Rogue. Which is actually something that happened to me earlier today. I ended up with way too many 5s, so I should really follow my own advice. Thankfully the deck still went 12, but it was not an easy deck to pilot because of it. I'll tell you that. So with 5-drops, what you want to keep your eye open for, and these are the ones that you should go cuckoo for, are Pit Fighter. Pit Fighter is tippy top. Silverhand Knight is way up there. Spiteful Smith, if you're playing a weapon class, is great. Spectral Knight, people have mixed feelings about Spectral Knight. I think it's okay, and I kind of like panic pick it. I don't rush to pick it. I don't get super excited over it like I do over Pit Fighter and Silverhand Knight, but I think it's okay, especially in the late into your draft, right? You're 25 picks in out of 30, and you're thinking, hey, I really need 5-drops. I gotta, you know, start picking some up. Then Spectral Knight's great card to pick up. Tiger is way up there as well. The stealth, you know, we really value stealth and just being able to have initiative with our trades. That's very important in Arena. So, once again, Pit Fighter, Silverhand Knight, Spectral, and Tiger. That's what you want to keep your eyes open for. And I'm not going to talk about like the rares and epics for 5s. It gets a little bit too confusing there. For 6-drops, you once again have a similar problem with 5s, where you don't want to have a bunch of 6-drops, because you got to think, you know, Ratsmah said 3 to 10 late game cards. That means you got to split 3 to 10 cards between 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cost cards. So you know you can't have too many. But cards that you should automatically salivate over, right, are Boulder Fist Ogre. Boulder Fist Ogre, Frost Ellie, maybe if you need a little bit of late game. Wait, where'd you go? Where'd you go? There's a card I'm looking for right now. I can't find it. Oh, Draconid. Okay, Draconid is also up there. So Boulder Fist Ogre, Draconid are really the only 6s that you're like really going crazy over, and Frost Ellie sometimes. Everything else is kind of bad. Just the stat allocation is terrible. And 7+ cards. Let's see. Maybe this will be easier. Oh, okay, that doesn't work. So Capture Jormonger, very good. Force Tank Max is good, but very slow. You gotta be careful with these cards. Capture Jormonger, Stormwind Champions, Force Tank Max, Kraken, and Kraken. Those are the 4 for your late game. Those are the ones that you really like. Kraken especially, and Capture Jormonger especially. A little bit less towards the Force Tank and the Stormwind Champion. But that just gives you an idea of, you know, if you see a Core Hound, you should just that card is not even an option. Same thing with like something like War Golem and something like let me see if I can find another bad card, like Fossilite's Devilsaur. Don't even think about it. It's not even. Definitely picking on curve for your 2, 3, 4, 5 curve is more important than picking up something like Fossilite or a War Golem. And so those are my top picks. The second part to this draft, besides minions, what you need to know is spells, and I'm not going to go like too in depth here. I'm just going to give you a basic so you kind of like understand how you should be thinking about it, how you should be thinking about drafting. So when we go to mage, you know, let's see. Oh, I have a run going. Perfect. So what you want with spells is you want to have like a nice mix of spells. So let's say that I have like 4 Soulfires, but you know I have no AoE. You know, then it's not a very balanced deck. And the real strength in your deck comes from your ability to deal with multiple situations, because it's not always you playing against the same class or the same type of deck. Sometimes you're the one being rushed down, sometimes you're the guy who's rushing down, you know, and depending on which role you're playing, something like an AoE is better, or something like a single target cheap removal is better, right? So the way I like to draft, and this is with most classes, I like to draft in a way where it's like, hey, you know, I have a Soulfire and a Dark Bomb and a Shadow Bolt. You know, those are my answers to the early game. For things that are like of, you know, 3-4 size or smaller, you know, I got this answer. And then for slightly bigger things, you know, I count charge as a removal as well, in a way. So I got like Doomguard and Demon Heart for slightly bigger things. And it would be a lot easier to tell with class like Mage or like Druid or Priest, where you pick more spells. So if we were playing Mage, for example, you don't want just like 5 Flame Strikes and no Frostbolts and no Polymorphs, right? It would make your deck really imbalanced and really bad in some matchups. So what you want is, you know, maybe 1 Frostbolt, 1 Flame Cannon, 1 Flame Strike, 1 Polymorph, 1 Fireball. That'd be perfect, right? But in an ideal world, you gotta kind of, you know, make do with what you're offered. So if you're given like a choice, let's say that you have 3 Fireballs already, and you're given a choice of like a Polymorph, right? Your first Polymorph or a Frostbolt, and you don't have a Flame Cannon or a Frostbolt, what would you pick? If you said Polymorph, I'm really disappointed, because the way you want to think about it is just like how we thought about Soulfire and Dark Bomb and Shadow Bolt as being very similar and them dealing with the early game. We want to think about Polymorph the same way as Fireball, because Fireball will deal with a lot of the big threats that you face as a mage. So we kind of think, hey, you know, we have 3 hard removals. You know, we can deal with 3 big things. Do we need a Polymorph to deal with the 4th? Not really. So maybe we need something small that we can fit into a turn while we try to survive as mage or whatever, you know. Just want to have a nice mix, you know. So you want to kind of group the spells up together. So Frostbolt, Flame Cannon are kind of the same thing. Flame Strike and Blizzard are kind of the same thing. Swipe and Starfall are kind of the same thing, while Wrath and Claw are the same thing. Does that make sense? So according to the effect and the cost, and how it very likely will be played in most of your games, you want to kind of group them together and make sure you have a nice mix. You know, you have spells throughout your deck, and not just, you know, have it all centralized in one part of your deck. A quick tutorial on how to know whether spells are good. Honestly, I did give you my top picks for minions, but if you just skim through, maybe you can't skim through a tier list. Generally, you don't want to pick up heals. You generally don't want to pick up heals, and you want to think about the minions that you're drafting. This is the best way, probably. So, is Wrath good? Yes, it is very good, because it deals with, you know, for 2 mana. What did we say about the minions? We're picking up 2 3s and 3 2s. It kills both of them. It kills both of them, and because you're doing a reactionary as a reaction, right? You're playing reactionarily, and then it does get a little bit better, but that does not mean that you want, you know, 6 Wraths for your early game and no 2-drops, you know, because you need to be able to develop yourself as well. So, what's another example? Moonfire. Is Moonfire good? Although you may say it kills like Abusive and Worgen Infiltrator, which we talked about, that situation actually does not come up very often, and oftentimes as Druid you'd rather just hero power it anyways. and just play from behind, because Druid's a very good class from behind, but that may be a little bit too, yeah. But generally you want cards that go trade 1-for-1 or gives you a card advantage that does something on board tempo-wise. And although that sounds like a crazy thing to say, there are cards that don't do anything for you card advantage or tempo-wise, and I'll give you an example of one. Cards like this, Holy Light. You lose a card advantage, and you actually do not gain any board presence, so you're losing tempo. You lose 2 mana on the board that you could be using to develop the board. So cards like these are really bad. You never want to pick cards that, you know, kind of heal your face. In a way they can be good because you can heal minions with it, but that is not actually what, it does not come into play very often. It's very difficult to make that come into play. So you want to keep that in mind. Things like Gang Up do not get you a card advantage. They actually lose you a card advantage, and once again, you're losing 2 mana. These tend to be like the worst kind of cards. And for most of it, before you start your draft, and since you should be a beginner if you're watching this, what you should do is, you know, you got a Paladin draft. Look at a Paladin tier list, and just look at the, you know, the excellent, very good section, and it should most tier lists should have the same cards at the very top. So if we're looking at a Paladin tier list, like every tier list will have Muster for Battle. Oh my god, do I not have that card? Wait, okay, sorry, I'm really bad with this UI here. So still not working because it's a 3-drop. Yeah. I'm a professional, guys. So Muster of Battle will always be at the top. You know, you got your True Silver, that'll be at the top. It'll be very apparent to you what cards are like tippy top tier. You got your Blessed Kings. So I don't need to go over like every single class card or spell for every class. Just look at a tier list real quick before you start your draft, and you should be a lot more comfortable. And make sure you don't overdo it with spells and weapons. You want a nice mix, and make sure you try to hit that 6-4-6 with your minions. It's a little bit nuanced. You can count things like Wrath that we talked about. You can count things like Wrath as part of your 2-drop mix, but that does not mean that you can count, you know, 6 Wraths. It gets less and you get less and less, because it has to be a card that you can play on that turn. So Wrath, I'd say 50% of the time when you're player 2 and you don't have to develop, right? So let's say that you're player 1, for example, and your opponent's player 2, you get to turn 2 first, and unless your opponent coins out a 2-drop, you have nothing to Wrath. Then all of a sudden, that's not part of your 6-4-6 curve. You can't play it on curve, so it's not a play on 2. So you miss your 2-drop, and that's not what we want, and that's why you need to be very careful. So I'd say you can count like up to like 2 spells. So you have like 2 Wraths. What is a better class to do this with? Mage. So if you have like 1 Frostbolt and 1 Flame Cannon and 4 minions of 2 cost, then you have your 6. You have your 6. That's fine. And then you have like 1 Forgotten Torch, and maybe you can count that as 3. But Forgotten Torch, once again, a lot of minions at 3 have 4 health. So you want to be a little bit careful for that. And this is yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I know I talk a lot, and yes, I don't know how helpful this is, but yeah, just don't think about me giving you like specific instructions on how to draft an arena. Think about the way I'm talking about arena and the way I'm thinking about it. And if you get that that way of thinking, then you will probably be better. A much stronger drafter yourself if you just understand where I'm coming from and why I think this way. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'm Ratsmah, twitch.tv/Ratsmah. You can check me out there, and I'll be back with my next video, which will be the playing part for beginners, and after that we'll go on to some tips for average players, and after the average player tips, we'll go on to the advanced player tips for Arena. But thanks for watching, and see you later.